Crime Page podcast featuring Scott Williams Collins.
Hello and welcome to the True Crime Page podcast. I'm your host Scott Williams Collier. Today guys, I want to talk about Alan Kaiser. Now, I'm sure some of you tuning in today will know who Alan is, but for those that don't, Alan was an innocent 16-year-old child from Brooklyn who cruelly had his life cut short. Now, this is a case I've wanted to cover for a long time now, and with the blessing of Alan's sister Joy, I can finally tell it in full with the respect and the attention it deserves. So, in this episode, I'm going to shine a light on Alan's life, the night it was stolen away, and the men that were responsible. Salvatore, Sammy the Bull Gravano and Louie Milito. Now, you may know their names from the world of organised crime, but this is not the mob's version of events, this is Alan's story. In the summer of 1977, New York City was gripped by fear. It was the summer of Sam, but for one Brooklyn family, that summer would never be remembered for a serial killer making the headlines. It would forever be remembered as the summer they lost a son and a brother. Alan Kaiser was just 16 years old. He lived in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, in a modest two-bedroom apartment with his mother, Shirley. Now, Alan wasn't a mobster. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't even hanging around with the wrong crowd. He was simply a kid. A teenager with his whole life in front of him. He was a gifted artist, an honour student at New Utrecht High, and mechanically talented like his father. But beyond all that, he was a caring brother. He worried deeply about his sister Joy. In fact, he gave her his penknife of protection, and he also asked her fiancé, Tom Ferracci, to make sure that son of Sam, who was stalking the streets that summer, didn't harm his beloved sister, Joy. On August the 5th, in 1977, Alan stepped out for the evening. Dressed proudly in a brand new white safari suit he'd just received for his birthday, tragically, it would be the last time his family ever saw him alive again. Around 11:30 in the evening that night, Alan was walking along King's Highway near 8th Street when two men, Sammy the Bull Gravano and his associate Louie Milito, jumped out of a car. They were both armed, one with a handgun and the other with a shotgun. Now that night, Gravano was out for revenge. A week earlier, he'd broken his ankle in a fight outside an after-hours club. His intended target was one of those men involved in that fight, a 21-year-old named Aldo Candido. As soon as Gravano and Milito sprang from the car and opened fire, Candido ran for his life. And in all this chaos, Alan Kaiser happened to walk straight into the scene. Wrong place, wrong time. And that was when Gravano signalled to him and Milito raised the shotgun and fired two shots into Alan, an innocent teenager who never had a chance. Now, I'm sure you'll agree, guys, every time I think about this and I read things like this, it really does make my blood run cold. You know, we had a bright young life stolen in an instant. A mother robbed of her son, a sister robbed of her brother. This wasn't just senseless violence, it was pure, unfiltered evil. For Alan's family, the pain of losing him was unbearable. But what made it even worse was the silence that followed. For more than 2 decades, they had no answers, no justice, no closure. Not even the truth about who had pulled the trigger and why their boy had been taken away from them. The murder of Alan Kaiser faded into the background. Just another unsolved killing in a city that was drowning in violence at the time. His mother, Shirley, and his sister, Joy, were left with grief and questions that nobody seemed willing to answer. It wasn't until over 20 years later that the truth finally surfaced. And the way that came out was like adding insult to injury. Sammy the Bull Gravano, the man who had ordered the death of Alan, had struck a deal with federal prosecutors in exchange for testifying against his own boss, John Gotti. He was the boss of the Gambino crime family. Gravano admitted to his role in 19 murders, including Alan Kaiser's. Now let's stop and think about that for a moment. Alan's family had to wait more than 2 decades to even learn the names of the men responsible for killing him. And when they did, it didn't come out through an investigation dedicated to Alan's case, but part of a plea bargain that allowed Sammy the Bull to walk away with a much lighter sentence. Now, I call that a deal with the devil. That's the only way to describe it. You know, the government wanted John Gotti so badly, they were willing to let a confessed killer, a man who'd admitted to orchestrating the cold-blooded murder of a 16-year-old boy, so that he could cut years off his prison time. For Alan Kaiser's family, there was no justice in that deal at all, just a bitter truth. Their son, their brother, had been murdered in cold blood, and the man responsible was still able to breathe free air, something that Alan never got to do again. Now, let's talk about one of the most disturbing aspects of Alan's case when it comes to Sammy the Bull Gravano, and that was his shameless attempt to victim blame a murdered 16-year-old boy. A 16-year-old boy he was directly involved in murdering. After being put under pressure to discuss what had happened to Alan Kaiser, Sammy had to finally address what happened that night in 1977. Eventually, on his own podcast, he reluctantly responded, but instead of telling the truth, instead of owning up to what was a cold-blooded killing, Sammy spun a story that defies all logic and insults Alan's memory. Sammy claimed that Alan ran towards the gun that Louie Milito was holding, as if a teenager who had just seen 2 grown men firing shots at someone would deliberately charge into danger. Sammy even threw in a disgusting suggestion that Alan must have been on drugs or something. Now, let's be clear, Alan Kaiser was not on drugs, he was just a kid, a 16-year-old kid with his whole life ahead of him. And no rational person, especially a frightened teenager, would ever run towards an armed grown man after witnessing that man try to kill someone else. The natural instinct is to run away, to get to safety, and that's what any human being would do in that situation. Now, this was Sammy's chance to come clean, to admit to what had happened, to acknowledge that Alan was gunned down, not because he was reckless, not because he made some bizarre suicidal choice, but because Sammy ordered it. Alan was an innocent witness who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Sammy wanted to silence him, and that's basically what he did. The truth is simple, and it's ugly. This was a calculated, cold-blooded murder to get rid of a witness, and rather than face that, Sammy Gravano chose to lie, chose to victim blame a murdered child in a desperate attempt to rewrite history. You know what else really gets me about Sammy the Bull Gravano is how lucky he is. He's incredibly lucky. Lucky he's still walking this earth, free to enjoy his life with his family. That's a privilege he stole from Alan Kaiser and Alan's family the moment that trigger was pulled in 1977. 16 years old, gone in an instant. Alan never got to grow up, fall in love, start a family of his own, chase his dreams. Sammy the Bull took all that away from him. Instead of living out his days in obscurity and shame, Sammy's made a career out of being Sammy the Bull. He's a brand now, a content creator. He sits in front of cameras, telling stories about their life, making money off murder, betrayal and blood. And the worst part, he's also handed a platform by other people who should know better, inviting him onto their shows. Take Piers Morgan, for example. Now, here's a man who loves to position himself as the moral compass for modern society. He'll rail against crime, call out injustice, wag his finger at the rest of us, and then he invites someone like Sammy the Bull Gravano onto his show. Like his opinion matters. Like the words of a man that murdered a child is worth broadcasting to millions. To me, that's not journalism, that's just ratings bait. And we've also got Michael Franzese, another ex-mobster who claims he's found God and turned his life around. Yet he calls someone like Sammy the Bull a friend. A man that took the life of an innocent kid. Now, forgive me if I'm not buying the whole born again act when you're chumming it up with someone like Sammy the Bull Gravano. And there's also the Patrick Bet David podcast, another high-profile stage for Sammy to tell stories on. Unchallenged, I can't recall a single one of these big-name hosts looking him in the eye and asking, what about Alan Kaiser? What about the 16-year-old boy you killed? Silence every time. Now, let me be clear, this isn't about cancel culture. This is about accountability, about the fact that Alan Kaiser's name is barely remembered, while the man who ended his life is booked, promoted and monetised like some kind of celebrity storyteller. That's not justice, that's a disgrace in my book. Mobsters killing mobsters is one thing. I'm not saying that's right, but if you sign up for that life, you know exactly what that entails. You know the risks, you know the rules, and the fact is that life usually ends in a cell or a coffin. That's the world they choose to live in. But killing an innocent 16-year-old kid, that's just vile. That's not the life. That's not some honourable underworld code. That's pure cowardice. Alan Kaiser wasn't in the mob. He wasn't a threat. He was just a kid living his life, walking down the street, minding his own business, and in an instant, it was stolen from him. And yet there are people out there that look up to Sammy the Bull, who treat him like some kind of folk hero, like he should be revered and respected. And I'll be honest with you guys, I really don't get it. It's as if the charisma, the stories, the swagger blinds people to the reality of what he's done. They get caught up in the mythology of the mob and forget there are real victims whose names never get spoken. Sammy's built a following off blood and tragedy, and too many people are willing to applaud him for it. To me, that's not respect, that's moral bankruptcy. There's always something that's bothered me about the American justice system, and especially when it comes to like the FBI, for instance, and how they operate in cases like Sammy the Bull, Gravano'S. You know, in their pursuit of the so-called bigger fish, they always seem willing to make deals with people who are every bit as or even more dangerous and evil as the target they're chasing. In Sammy the Bull's case, the FBI made what was called a deal with the devil. They gave him a pass on 19 murders, that's 19 lives that have been taken, that he's been involved in, because they wanted John Gotti, the boss of the Gambino crime family. And sure, they got John Gotti, he went down, but at what cost? To me, it's a dangerous trade-off. It sends the message that as long as you can give the authorities someone bigger, your own trail of blood can be overlooked. And to me, that's not justice. That's selective justice. And it leaves victims and the families, like Alan Kaiser's, robbed of any real accountability. I'll be the first to say that our own justice system over here in the UK is far too soft and far too lenient when it comes to violent offenders. But there's one thing I will say for it. We don't generally make deals like that. We don't wipe the slate clean for mass murderers because he can help us lock someone else up. And that's something I'm glad we don't do over here. I really don't agree with making deals with dangerous people. They should do everything they can to investigate that person from top to bottom. And when they find any murders or any serious criminality they've been involved in, they should be sent to prison. And the prison sentence they get should fit the crimes they've committed. You know, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Sammy the Bull Gravano is very lucky he's out walking the streets right now. The idea that someone like Sammy the Bull could be free and start a new life and even profit from telling his story while the families of his victims are left with nothing but grief, it's sickening really. The FBI might have taken down John Gotti, but they handed a cold-blooded killer a get-out-of-jail card. And in my eyes, that's not a victory for justice. Okay guys, that's the end of the podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it or at least got something from it. I'm sure Joy will be listening to this later. I hope I've done Alan's story some justice. Like I said, I just wanted to shine some light on it. It does bother me that people like Sammy the Bull Gravano can profit from basically living such an evil, toxic lifestyle. A lot of the time with these kind of cases, we never talk about or remember the victims. It's always the perpetrators that we talk about, which is really sad in my eyes. You know, Sammy the Bull Gravano is a sociopath, and I'm pretty sure he has no remorse whatsoever for what he did to Alan Kaiser. To him, murder is as normal as sitting down and having a cup of tea. So, do me a favour, everybody, If you've listened to this podcast and you've listened this far, if Sammy the Bull ever pops up on your feed on YouTube, just remember, when you see his face or you see any content or interviews that he's done, remember Alan Kaiser and what he did to him. That's it for now, guys. I'll be back soon with some more content. I'll just give you a little heads up on what I'm planning on doing in the near future. A lot of you know that I've covered the Vera Anderson cold case and that I am involved in campaigning on Vera's case. We've been running the Justice for Vera Anderson Facebook group for about 4 years now. And myself and Ian Rigby also took part in the Footsteps of Killers documentary on Channel 4 recently, which was covering Vera's case. So I am planning on covering Vera's case again on my podcast. We know a lot more about Vera's case since we've been running the group. We've had a lot of interesting conversations with people that knew Vera. You know, we've been knocking on doors and speaking to neighbours and friends and work colleagues and family members. So I know a lot more about Vera's case. I'm going to cover it again and make the things that I'm allowed to make public. I will mention them in the podcast. So stay tuned for that. I'm also planning on interviewing Stephen Downing. Now, for those that are really into UK true crime, I'm sure you'll know who Stephen is. But for those that don't, Stephen suffered what was said to be Britain's worst case of a miscarriage of justice after serving 27 years in prison for a murder he's always denied committing. I'll be honest, Stephen wasn't too interested about coming on the podcast at first, but after listening to one of my podcasts, he's kindly agreed to do an interview. So I'm hoping to meet up with him soon. I'm just going to try and sort some stuff out, and hopefully I'll be doing that soon in the next few weeks, in the near future anyway. So stay tuned for that one. Now, don't forget to like this video, guys, share it, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. It's free to do so. It'll keep you up to date with all my content. If you want to ask me anything, feel free to leave me a comment. I will get back to you. And that's it for now. Thanks for listening, and remember to be good to one another, and until next time, I'll see you again.